Hey everyone, in this video I'll be showing you how to authenticate a Flask API using JSON Web Tokens. So if you've watched my previous two videos, you would have seen that I covered how to use HTTP basic authentication in Flask and also an introduction to JSON Web Tokens. And the reason why I covered those in the last two videos is because for this video I need to use both those things and combine them in such a way for the authentication to work. So in this video, I'll cover the basics of doing it. And then in the next video, I'll create a more realistic example of how to use this in an actual API. So this video will be fairly basic, but it will have all the pieces that are necessary to do it. So even if you didn't watch the next video, you should be able to figure out how to do everything from this one. So before I get started writing the code, I just want to remind you that I have courses up on prettyprinted.com. So if you're interested in taking any longer Flask courses that are more organized, you can check out prettyprinted.com and see the courses there. I have a combination of free courses and premium courses. So the first thing that I need to do for my API is set up a couple of routes. One route will be for logging in. Another route will be a protected route. So this route can only be seen if you are authenticated. And a final route will be a route where anybody can see it. So I'm going to do everything in the browser in this example, but in the next video, I'll do everything through Postman, so it makes more sense, but the browser should suffice for this example. So the three routes I'll create are unprotected. So this route will not be protected at all. So any user of your API can call it, and I'll fill that in later. And then I'll have a route called protected, and this route will be only for people who are authenticated. So if you don't pass in the correct token, then you won't be able to view this route. So I'll fill in the return later. And then finally, I'll have a route for logging in. This route will be used to get the token that will be used to view the protected route. So logging in, you have to supply a username and password first. Then you'll get a token in return, and then you can use that token for the protected route. So I'll call this login, and I'll return the token later. So what I want to import is JSONify, request, and make response. So JSONify will be to return JSON objects instead of HTML. Request will be to get the incoming request data. So in this example, I'll get the login information and the token depending on the situation. And then make response will be used to tell the browser or the API that HTTP basic authentication is required for login. So to start, I'll work on the login route, and I'll ignore these two for now. And with the login route, what I want to do is first I need to get the authentication or authorization information. So if you saw the video on doing this, then this will be very familiar, but I'll explain briefly what's going on again. So I'm creating a variable called auth, and it's going to be set to request that authorization. So this will give me the username and password that is sent along with the request to this login route. So then I want to check if this information actually exists. So there is a username and password passed along with it. And if it does exist, in this case, I only want to check the password because this is a simple example. In the next video, I'll make a more realistic example. But for this one, I'll just say auth password is equal to password. So I don't care about the username, but in a realistic example, you obviously will care about the username. But in this case, I only want the password. And if the password is equal to password, then I'll say that they are logged in correctly. So I'll briefly skip what happens if the password is correct, and I'll just simply add what happens if the password isn't correct or if they don't even supply a username and password. So what I'm going to do is I'll make a response, and I will say could not verify, and I'll pass back a 401 error telling them that they need to log in. And then finally, I'll pass the headers saying that this is the HTTP basic login. So www.authenticate. Did I spell that right? Authenticate. Okay. And then see basic realm, and then I'll say login required. Okay, so if the login information is incorrect, or if the login information is incorrect or there is no login information, then it's going to return nothing. And if it is correct, or if it isn't correct, then it's going to return could not verify. So let's just say could not. So let me just test that out really quick. My app should be running. No, it crashed, so I'll run it again. Okay, so there's no route on the index. I'll go to login, and I see the box pops up. So if I put Anthony as the username and then password as the password, this should log me in, and nothing gets returned because I have nothing there. So now what I want to do is, if they are logged in correctly, I want to return a token. So how the API will work is they will log in once, and after they log in, they'll get a token in return. They can then use that token on any subsequent requests, and then my server will automatically verify that that token is valid, and that token will have information about who the user is, so I know what data to send back in the response if anything is relevant to the particular user. So I need to import a couple of things before I can use the token. I need to import JWT for JSON Web Tokens. So you need to have PyJWT installed. So pip install PyJWT. So import JWT. And then I'm also going to import datetime because I'm going to make sure the token expires after a while. So now I'll go back down here to the return statement, and I will generate a token. So I'll create a variable called token, and then I'll call jwt.encode. And in the payload for this token, I want a couple of things. I want the actual user who has logged in. So I'll call it user here, and auth.username. So that's where the username comes into play. It's not used to verify the authentication, but it is used to identify who the user is. And like I said, this is a contrived example that's very basic. It's just to show you the basics of it. And then in the next example, I'll show you a more realistic one. And then I also have an expiration. So this expiration is actually a reserved part of the payload in JSON Web Tokens. And it basically tells you when the JSON Web Token will expire. And to determine when it will expire, first I'll get the current date at the time that the token is being generated. So datetime.datetime.utc now. So the expiration value needs to be a Unix style UTC date, which is just like an integer. And then I'm going to add an interval. And that interval is going to be, let's see, datetime.time delta. And let's say minutes, 30 minutes. So what I'm doing is I'm setting this token to expire 30 minutes after it gets created. So the idea is when someone logs in and you give them a token, you don't want that token to be valid forever. You want that token to expire after some time, so they will be forced to log in again. It's just basic security. Obviously, you don't want the token to expire after 30 seconds. Otherwise, they'd have to log in constantly. And if you have the token expire after like a year, then it's pretty much useless to have an expiration on there in the first place. So 30 minutes is nice. Maybe 24 hours is more standard. That depends on your case. I'll just use 30 minutes here, but this obviously can be changed to any value that you want. So after you have the payload information, you have to supply a secret key. So I'll just create the secret key in my app configuration. So app.config secret key. And I'll say this is the secret key, which is obviously a pretty bad secret key, but that's the one I'll use here. And I simply need to pass that into jwt.encode. So it's the next argument after the payload itself. So config and then secret key. And I'm going to use the default encoding algorithm, so I won't add any value there. So now I have the token here in this variable, and what I want to do is I want to return this token to the user, and I'll return it in a JSON object. So return JSONify, and I'll pass it through the key token, and I'll pass token there. And since I'm using Python 3, this token is actually generated in bytes, so I need to decode this token to be a regular string. So decode, and I'll do UTF-8. If you're using Python 2, you may not have to do that, so just check. What you're looking for is the B apostrophe before the actual token. So now that I have all that, I can test my login route again. So I'll go back to login. And since the information is still there from my browser, I can see the token. So here's the token. And what I'll do is I'll actually take this token and I'll go to jwt.io and I'll put it in their little debugger. And on the right-hand side, you'll see the data that is in the payload. So you see the user is Anthony, and the expiration is that there, which is a Unix timestamp. And the signature is invalid because the secret key is wrong. But if I take the secret key that I have here and paste it in here, it should come back verified, which it does. So we can see that the token is doing what it's supposed to do. So now that I can generate the token, the next thing I want to do is I want to make it to where I can easily protect multiple routes that require the token to be available. So what I'll do is I'll create a decorator that basically says, check and see if the token is along in the request. If it is, get it and make sure the token is valid. If it's valid, then let the user continue on to the actual view function for that route. And if it's invalid, then return a message saying that the token is invalid. So pretty basic authentication thing. So I'll create the decorator here, which will be applied to my protected route. And I'll just say token required is going to be the name. So I need to pass in the function there, and I need to import wraps from functools. So from functools, import wraps. Then what I'll do is wraps the same function, which is the view function. Then I'll create the inner decorated function, which takes the arbitrary arguments. Okay, so now what I want to do is I want to get the token. There are multiple ways to get the token from the request. So there are different ways that you can tell the consumers of your API to YouTube. You can tell the consumers of your API how to pass along the information for the token. But in this case, I'll do it in the simplest way possible, and it will be passed through the query string. So to get the token out of the query string, I'll create a variable called token, and I'll use the request.args get token, which is just getting the token out of the query string. So as an example, it will look something like this. HTTP and then localhost port 5000 routes, and then token would be blah, 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 all this right there. So that's what I mean by query string. But in the next video, in the more realistic example, I'll show you an alternative way and probably a better way of having the users of your API pass the token to you. So now what I want to do is I want to verify that this token is valid. So I'm going to try, because the following function, jwt.decode, will raise an exception if the token is invalid. So I'm not going to catch the specific error in this case, but in the next video, a more realistic example, I'll do that. So I'm going to decode the token. So the token is passed in through the query string, and I need to supply the secret key again. So app.config secret key. And if the token is able to be decoded, then I will return the actual function, the view function. So keyword arguments there. And if the token is invalid, so the exception block gets activated, I'm going to return a JSON object saying something like message token is missing or invalid. And actually, I'll say the token is invalid in this case. And what I'll say is if not token, meaning there is nothing for the token, I'll return JSONify token is missing. So we can see both cases. And I'll pass back a 403 here, and now let's do 403. I'm not completely sure on the differences between 401 and 403, but they're pretty similar. So anyway, 403 gets passed back, and there's a missing and invalid one for this. So this is actually pretty simple. So now I'll just fill in the two routes. I'll say for unprotected, return JSONify, say message. Anyone can view this. And then I'll say for the protected route, this is only available for people with valid tokens. Okay, so the final thing I need to do here is add the decorator, the token required decorator. So the protected route is treated differently than the unprotected route. So now if I go back to my browser and I go to unprotected, let's see, did it crash? Yes. Let's see. On line 30, I have an error. So where's line 30? So app routes, unprotected, token required. So let's see. I don't think I've ever seen this particular error before, so I'll work with it with you. Token required. It's saying that token required is an issue. Oh, and I think it's because I didn't return decorated. So return decorated, because I have to return this inner function so this outer function knows what to do. So I think that's the error, and that was the error. So now I can go to unprotected, and I see the message, anyone can view this, which is exactly what I want. If I go to protected, I see the token is missing. So now what I'll do is I'll input an invalid token. So remember, I'm using the query string, so token, and then I think it's still there. Well, how about this? This is the secret key. That's obviously not the token. So if I call that again, it tells me that the token is invalid. So what I need to do then is go to login, which will give me the actual token. So I'll copy and paste this. Then I'll go back to protected, token, and then I'll add the token. And then it tells me this is only available for people with a valid token. So that means I was able to get to the protected route. So in the previous two, when I tried it, you saw that it ended in here in the decorator, and it didn't even let me get to the view function. But once I supplied a valid token, then it worked correctly. So now what I'll do is I'll set the token to expire in like 15 seconds. So you can see what happens over time. So I'll go back to the login route, and I'll change the password too, so it forces me to log in again. Let's say password is now secret. So I'll go to the login route. It's telling me to log in. So my username will be Anthony again. Doesn't really matter in this case. And the password will be secret. Don't save. So it gives me a new token. So let me quickly take that and go to protected. Token. And it tells me that this is only available for people with valid tokens. So I'll keep refreshing, and it's still valid. And then all of a sudden it's invalid. And that's because my token was set to expire after 15 seconds. So as you can see, the expiration works. And if I want a new token, then of course I'd have to go to log in again, get that new token, and then supply it in each one of the subsequent requests to any of the protected routes. So that's pretty much it. That shows you the basics of using the tokens for authentication. So as you can see, you don't have to pass in a username and password each time you want to authenticate yourself. You simply pass the token along with the request, and then that will allow the server to know who is requesting the information and if the person is allowed to access that data or not. So like I said, in the next video, I'll create a more complete example so you can see how it works in a real life example, how it will work in the real world. and that should complete everything on this topic. So if you have any questions about this video, like always, just leave a comment down below and I'll get to it. If you like this video, please give me a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed to my channel already, please subscribe. I'll have a link to the code and the other videos in the description below, so if you want to get that, you can. And finally, check out prettyprinted.com for courses in Python and Flask. And that's it. So thank you for watching this video, and I will talk to you next time.